Ethan Parker never thought a casual joke would change his life forever, yet it all began on the shining world of Valari, a place so different from Earth that every step felt like walking into another dream. He had been chosen as part of cultural exchange, not a soldier or a politician, but a young human engineer who could repair machines and talk his way through problems with a smile. And that smile had made him a strange favorite among the Valari people, who found humans unpredictable and oddly fascinating. But none found him more curious than Princess Aria, daughter of the Valari Emperor, who carried herself with an air of grace so sharp it almost cut, her silver eyes watching Ethan with quiet interest as he worked day after day in the palace workshops. And it was during one of their conversations, when the sun cast golden light through the crystal windows of the throne hall, that Ethan, feeling light-hearted and unguarded, said the words that would twist his fate. "You'd make a cute wife," he joked with a grin, expecting her to laugh, expecting her to roll her eyes as many humans would. But instead, the hall seemed to fall silent, and Princess Aria froze as if the air itself had locked her in place, her eyes widening slightly before she straightened her posture, her voice calm yet powerful as she spoke words he would never forget. "I accept," she said, not a trace of humor in her tone. And Ethan laughed nervously, trying to wave it off as a misunderstanding, saying, "Wait, no, I didn't mean..." But he stopped when the guards, tall and armored, suddenly dropped to one knee in unison, bowed before him as if he had become someone else entirely, the chamber echoing with the sound of metal against stone. And Ethan's heart skipped as he realized that something ancient and serious had just been awakened. Whispers rushed to the court like wind through a forest, and ministers with long robes began murmuring about the sacred vow, while Arya stood tall, her gaze locked on him, not with anger, not with humor, but with an intensity that made his stomach twist. And in that instant, Ethan felt trapped between two worlds, his human side screaming that it had been nothing but a clumsy joke, and yet another voice deep inside whispering that it had touched something far larger than himself, something older than Earth's oldest legends, a custom carved into the very bones of Valari tradition. He tried again to explain, his words stumbling out. It was just, "I didn't mean, on Earth we sometimes say things we don't really." But no one was listening to him anymore, not the guards, not the council, not even the Emperor, who had entered the hall in silent steps, his tall frame wrapped in ceremonial robes that shimmered with threads of gold, his expression unreadable as his piercing gaze fell upon Ethan, and the weight of it nearly crushed the young engineer's breath, because in that moment Ethan understood that he had spoken into a culture where words, where binding and casual jokes did not exist, and what had been lighthearted to him was sacred to them, especially when directed at a royal heir. Princess Aria's face remained unreadable, but when her voice broke the silence again, it carried across the hall like a command of destiny. "I gave my word, and I do not break it," she said firmly, her silver eyes never leaving his, and Ethan felt his chest tighten, for there was no laughter, no smile, only a quiet fire burning in her gaze that hinted at something deeper than duty, something he could not yet name. The court shifted with excitement, guards whispering about destiny, servants scurrying with urgency, while Ethan stood rooted to the polished stone floor, his mind racing, his heart pounding, and his world spinning, unable to decide whether he had just stumbled into the biggest misunderstanding in galactic history, or the beginning of something that would alter not only his life, but the fragile bond between Earth and the Valari Empire. And as the sound of distant ceremonial drums began to echo from outside, announcing what he feared might already be spreading as news to the entire city, Ethan realized with a shiver that his joke had been taken as truth, and the Valari did not take truth lightly, especially when it involved their princess. And when Arya stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear, whispering, "Do not be afraid. This is fate," his knees nearly gave way, because in her words there was no doubt, only certainty, and that certainty was the most terrifying thing he had ever heard. Ethan could hardly believe how quickly his life had spun out of control. One careless joke had chained him to a tradition older than the Valari Empire itself. And no matter how many times he tried to explain that it was a misunderstanding, his words seemed to fall into silence, for the Valari Council had already gathered a ring of robed figures whose voices carried the weight of law, and they spoke not to ask if Ethan agreed, but to discuss preparations as though everything was already decided, their tones sharp and ceremonial, their hands moving in ritual gestures that signaled the beginning of what they called a binding union. and Ethan felt the walls closing in on him. He tried to protest, raising his hands, stammering that on Earth marriage was a personal choice, that people joked about all the time without meaning it. But his words were met with confusion and disapproval, for the Valari language had no word for joke in the way humans understood it, and every syllable of affection was sacred, especially when uttered before royalty, and the guards stared at him as though he were some legendary figure brought to life, while the servants rushed about with anxious excitement, spreading the news through the palace corridors until Ethan could hear shouts and cheers rising from the city below. The people already celebrating what they believed to be a royal betrothal between their beloved princess and the strange human envoy. He turned desperately to Arya, hoping she would laugh and admit it was all a mistake. But instead she stepped forward, her silver eyes glowing with resolve, declaring to the council that she had accepted the vow and would not take it back, her words delivered with such authority that even the Emperor himself remained silent, and Ethan felt his breath falter, wondering why she would offend what was clearly never meant to happen. Yet when their eyes met for a brief second, he caught something in her gaze, not duty alone, but a flicker of quiet relief, as if this strange accident had given her freedom she had secretly longed for. The Emperor finally spoke, his deep voice echoing like thunder across the chamber, reminding the court that the Valari were bound by their traditions, and that once a vow was spoken, it could not be undone without great dishonor. And Ethan realized with a cold, sinking feeling that backing out might not only disgrace Arya, but also shatter the fragile peace between Earth and the Vala. And the thought of his mistake turning into a diplomatic disaster made his stomach churn. He tried again, softer this time, telling Arya that he never intended to trap her, that humans believed in love and choice, but Arya lifted a hand, silencing him, her voice gentle but unyielding as she said, "I gave my word, and I will not break it." And though her words frightened him, they also carried a strange warmth, as though she was not simply bound by tradition, but making a choice for herself. The council erupted in chants of approval. Servants bowed low, and Ethan was ushered forward by guards who treated him no longer as a visitor, but as a royal consort in waiting, their hands firm yet oddly respectful, and every step felt like walking into a storm he could not escape. The corridors were alive with whispers, the air thick with excitement, and Ethan's mind raced with panic, yet somewhere deep inside, a small, stubborn spark of curiosity flickered, wondering why Arya had not denied it, why she had taken his joke and turned it into a declaration of fate, and whether he was caught in something larger than a mistake, something woven into destiny. When the council dismissed the gathering, announcing preparations for a public ceremony to confirm the bond, Ethan stood alone in the shadows of the grand hall, his chest tight, his thoughts colliding like fire and ice, and when Arya approached him at last, dismissing the guards with a simple wave of her hand, she looked at him not with the cold eyes of a princess obeying duty, but with the steady gaze of someone carrying secrets, and her voice dropped to a whisper only he could hear. "Do you regret it?" she asked, the question hanging heavy between them. And though Ethan wanted to say yes, to shout that it had all been a terrible mistake, the words refused to form, for he sensed that her question was not about tradition, nor about politics, but about him, about whether he was willing to see this path through with her. And in that silence, surrounded by alien grandeur and the weight of a world he barely understood, Ethan felt both fear and wonder intertwine, leaving him unsure whether he was a prisoner of misunderstanding or the key to something extraordinary. Ethan's days in the Valari Palace became a blur of rituals, lessons, and endless watchful eyes, and though every corridor glittered with crystal light and alien artistry, he felt more like a bird trapped in a gilded cage than an honored guest. Yet in the midst of this overwhelming storm of tradition, he found himself drawn again and again to Princess Arya, who carried herself with a calm strength that unsettled him, for she was both a symbol of duty and a mystery he could not solve. He began to notice things he had missed before. The subtle way her shoulders tensed when the council reminded her of political marriages long arranged, the guarded sadness in her silver eyes when she thought no one was watching, the rare moments of softness when she spoke to him without titles or formality, moments when her voice sounded less like a princess and more like a young woman longing to be free. And Ethan realized that his careless joke had given her something she had never dared to claim, the chance to choose for herself. Still, his human heart fought with his reason, telling him that this was a mistake, that he should correct it before the bond became irreversible, But every time he tried to imagine standing before the Emperor and saying the truth, he felt the weight of Aria's gaze and the unspoken question in her eyes, asking whether he would betray her hope just to free himself. Matters grew worse when whispers of unrest began to surface, rival factions within the Valari Council, calling Ethan's presence a threat. Some claiming that a human consort would weaken their empire, others fearing that Earth would gain influence beyond measure. And as tensions grew, Ethan was thrust into meetings with foreign dignitaries who studied him with cold suspicion, their words sharp and their smiles thin, and he felt the pressure of galaxy's politics crushing down on his shoulders. Yet what haunted him most was not the threat of war, but the steady realization that Aria herself was not merely trapped by custom, but had chosen to defend him, to stand firm when she could have laughed and dismiss his joke as meaningless. And he began to wonder why. One evening, as the sun bled crimson across the alien skies, Aria led him to a hidden balcony overlooking the city, where the lights flickered like stars below, and she spoke in a voice stripped of titles, telling him how she had grown up under constant watch, her life decided by others before she was old enough to speak. Her future planned as a tool for alliances, her choices buried beneath layers of duty. And she confessed that when he had spoken those careless words, she had felt a spark of something rare, a choice not made for her, a chance to seize her own destiny. And Ethan listened, his heart tightening as he realized that to her, his joke was not a trap but a lifeline, and the weight of that truth settled heavy upon him. For now, he could not simply walk away without breaking more than tradition, but fate rarely gives time for quiet reflection, and the palace walls soon shook with crisis. For news came that rival houses had declared the union unacceptable, and during a grand ceremony meant to honor the bond, shadows moved through the crowd, figures with hidden weapons slipping past the guards. And before Ethan could grasp what was happening, a roar of chaos erupted, the air crackling with energy blasts, the chamber exploding into panic as enemies struck, and in that moment, instinct overcame. Confusion, for Ethan, though unarmed and untrained, threw himself forward without thought, shielding Aria with his own body as blasts tore through the hall, the searing heat grazing his arm, pain biting deep but determination stronger than fear. And in that split second he saw the astonishment in her eyes, not because he protected her, but because he had done so without hesitation, and the world seemed to slow as guards fought back, as attackers were dragged down, as smoke filled the once pristine chamber. And when silence finally returned, broken only by the crackle of damaged walls, Ethan lay bruised and bleeding but alive, his arms still curled protectively around Aria, and the court, the guards, even the Emperor himself, looked at him not with suspicion but with awe, for a human who had no obligation had risked his life for their princess. And in that moment Ethan realized that whatever began as a joke had now become something far more dangerous, for he had crossed a line between duty and choice, and the galaxy would never see him the same way again. The attack left the Valari Palace shaken, its grand halls scarred by scorched marks and shattered crystal. But what lingered strongest was not the damage to walls or ceilings. It was a memory of Ethan throwing himself between the assassins and Princess Aria without a second thought. And though he carried burns across his arm and bruises along his ribs, he had refused to leave her side even as the guards swarmed to protect him, a choice that spread through the court like wildfire, changing whispers of doubt into reluctant respect. And when Aria herself insisted on tending to his wounds instead of leaving him to the healers, the gesture stunned the palace staff, for never before had the princess touched the bandages of another, let alone a foreigner. Yet she sat quietly at his side, her hand steady as she wrapped his arm, her expression unreadable, though her silver eyes softened in ways that made Ethan's heart twist. The Emperor visited briefly, his gaze heavy with calculation, and though he spoke no words of approval, Ethan noticed the faintest nod, as if acknowledging what his daughter had seen long before, that the human was no longer an outsider, but a man who had shown courage greater than his own fear, and that courage could not be dismissed. Still, Ethan wrestled with turmoil, lying awake at night in the guest chamber, staring at the alien ceiling as questions tormented him. Why had he risked his life for a princess bound to him by mistake? Why did her quiet smile stir something warm in his chest? And why did every attempt to step away from this unwanted destiny feel more impossible than before? Yet each morning he found himself drawn back to her presence, not because of obligation, but because the human heart inside him would not let him forget the way she had looked at him in that instant of danger, not as a princess shielded by duty, but as a woman seeing him. truly seeing him. As days passed, the council grew divided, some praising Ethan's bravery as proof of destiny, others demanding that a human consort be cast aside before their enemies grew bolder, and the palace filled with tension so sharp it seemed the air itself might break. But in the quiet corners of the vast halls, Ethan and Arya spoke in whispers, conversation stripped of formality, where she revealed pieces of herself hidden from everyone else. The loneliness of being born into a crown, the weight of choices stolen by tradition, the secret fear that her people loved the idea of her more than the person she was. And Ethan, listening, began to understand that the woman before him was not simply a princess trapped by alien customs, but human heart in her own way, longing for freedom, for trust, for someone who would see her as more than a symbol. One night, beneath the glow of Valari moons, Ethan finally confessed that his words, the joke that began everything, had not been serious, that on Earth such comments were often light and playful, never meant to bind. In his voice cracked with guilt as he told her he never wanted to trap her into duty she did not choose. But instead of anger, Arya smiled faintly, her voice soft as she answered, "And yet you stood for me when no vow required it." And Ethan's chest tightened, for she was right. Whatever had started in error had now grown into something neither of them could deny, a bond forged not by tradition, but by choice in moments of fear and danger. Before he could find words, messengers arrived with grim news. Enemies outside the palace were gathering strength, declaring Ethan's presence as proof of human corruption in Valari affairs, demanding that the union be broken or war would follow. And once again Ethan found himself pulled into a storm larger than himself, caught between the safety of his own people and the trust shining in Arya's eyes. And though fear clawed at him, a deeper truth rose inside, a truth that frightened him even more, that he no longer wanted to escape, that somewhere between misunderstanding and survival, his heart had chosen her. And as he stood with her on the palace balcony, hearing the distant drums of unrest echo from the city streets, he realized that this story was no longer about a joke, but about the courage to turn chance into destiny. And though the galaxy might oppose them, Ethan felt the steady beat of his own heart whispering that the most powerful weapon he carried was not his mind or his skill, but the unyielding strength of the human heart. The palace stood on edge as the threat of war pressed closer, the rival houses shouting for the bond to be broken, their voices loud enough to echo across the city. And even within the Emperor's court the tension split like a crack through glass, some demanding Ethan be sent back to Earth before blood was spilled, others insisting that breaking the vow would bring dishonor greater than any battle. And Ethan found himself at the center of a storm he never asked for, a young engineer from Earth, forced to carry the weight of a decision that could change the fate of two worlds, his chest heavy with doubt, yet his mind sharpened by one undeniable truth. He could not walk away now, not after what he had seen in Arya's eyes, not after the courage she had shown in defending him when she could have cast him aside. As the day of the public declaration arrived, the grand ceremonial square filled with thousands of Valari citizens, their armor and banners shining beneath the alien suns, and the sound of drums thundered through the air like a heartbeat, while Ethan stood beside Arya on a raised platform, feeling every gaze burning into him, waiting to hear whether he would accept or deny the bond, his palms sweating as he realized that one word could either unite or divide an empire. The Emperor's voice rang out, deep and steady, announcing that his daughter had accepted the vow of marriage according to tradition, and now the human must speak, and silence fell so heavy it felt as though the entire galaxy was holding its breath, Ethan's mind racing with memories of Earth, of the life he might lose, of the safety he might never return to, and yet louder than fear was a memory of Arya whispering that his words had given her a choice, the memory of her tending to his wounds with quiet care, the memory of her silver eyes watching him not as a stranger, but as someone who had changed her world. And in that silence he found his answer, his voice steady though his heart pounded as he declared, "This was never meant to happen, but I choose it now." And the words rolled across the square with a power he did not expect, because they were not bound by tradition but by choice, by the human belief that love and loyalty were strongest when freely given. And for a moment the crowd was still, then erupted into cries of shock and awe, some cheering, others shouting in anger, but all unable to deny the courage of his declaration. Arya stepped forward then, taking his hand before all of them, her grip firm and warm, her voice clear as she said, "This bond is no mistake, it is our will, and together they faced the uproar. Their unity is shield stronger than any guard, and Ethan felt a strange calm settle over him. For though he had no idea what battles lay ahead, he knew that whatever came, they would face it side by side. Yet even as the moment solidified their place in history, the tension did not vanish. For enemies still stirred in the shadows, their plots now sharpened by his defiance, and the future loomed uncertain. But Ethan understood something that gave him strength. His joke had been taken as fate, but it was his choice that transformed it into truth, and the Valari, whether they accepted it or not, had witnessed a power of human heart that could turn chance into destiny. As the ceremony ended and the banners of the Empire unfurled across the square, Ethan stood, taller than he ever had before, no longer the nervous engineer who stumbled into alien traditions, but a man who had chosen his path. And when Arya leaned closer, whispering so only he could hear, more than a joke, he smiled despite the storm awaiting them, for he knew she was right. And in that single moment of shared resolve, as two worlds collided in awe and uncertainty, Ethan Parker understood that what had begun with careless words had grown into something unbreakable, something stronger than politics or fear, something that would echo across stars as proof that sometimes destiny is not written by bloodlines or laws, but by the simple courage to say yes when the whole world expects you to run.